Good evening and welcome to the Grand Theatre and tonight's Walrus Talks, Remembrance. My name is Dennis Garnham. I'm the artistic director here at the Grand Theatre. Welcome. The Grand Theatre exists on traditional territory, and we respect and honor the long-standing relationships of the three local First Nations group of this land and place in southwestern Ontario. They are the Chippewa of the Thames First Nations, the Oneida Nations of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. And now I'm standing here on the beautiful, beautiful Spreet stage, and you are looking at behind the screens, you're looking at remnants of our production of Timothy Finley's The Wars. This is a play which chronicles the young Canadian's journey of World War I from his home in France to the frontline battlefields, to home in Toronto, to the frontline, Toronto, battlefields, France, wrong. Take two. Timothy Finley's The Wars chronicles a young Canadian's journey in World War I from his home in France to the frontline battlefield. You heard it wrong. Seriously, that was, okay. I'm standing here on the Spreet stage and you're looking at the setting for Timothy Finley's The Wars, which chronicles a young Canadian's journey in World War I from his home in Toronto to the front lines of battlefields in France. Yeah, that's how it's gonna go tonight. This production continues, it's been running for 2 beautiful weeks. It has one more week and we finish on November 11th at 2 p.m. I invite you, if you haven't come, to come and share with us. I think it's going to be an incredible day, November 11th, an incredible performance. Now, when I arrived here at the Grand Theatre about 2 years ago, a man named Michael Milday, who is the Dean of Faculty of Arts and Humanity at Western, gave me a call. He said we had a mutual friend named Shelley Ambrose from Walrus, who's the executive director and also the publisher of Walrus magazine. And when Shelley calls, you listen. Instantly, I said, Michael, we have to meet as fast as we can. We have to meet as fast as we can. We went for lunch, and I said, Michael, you get it, right? You get it? What we have to do? Yes, we have to meet. We have to do what Shelley says. And instantly, because that's how it works in Shelley's world, I noticed a very intelligent, passionate man. I realized there was this incredible opportunity for the Grand Theatre and the Western to partner in a special way. The next thing we talked about was, what are we going to do? Because in the land of Shelley Ambrose, you must do something. Michael proposed tonight, and we are here because of this. I met Shelley Ambrose when I moved to New York about over 15 years ago. I was there for about 4 years, and about a week in, Shelley was working at the Canadian consulate. I got a call from Shelley, and she said, I hear you're new. We'll take care of you. She's one of my best friends. I'm so honored to introduce Shelley Ambrose.
Wasn't that the sweetest thing ever? Thank you, Dennis, for that very warm welcome, and thank you for having us in this beautiful space here at the Grand. Welcome to Western University Presents the Walrus Talks, Remembrance. That is hard to say. I could see how you consummate professional would be getting a little flustered there. This optimistic project called The Walrus started 15 years ago, and our goal is to create forums for conversations about Canada and its place in the world. I don't have to tell you that Canada's conversation is complex and necessary, and at the Walrus it takes many forms. Fact-based journalism in the Walrus magazine and at thewalrus.ca, in the Walrus books, the Walrus podcasts, and in rooms like this at the Walrus Talks. No matter where the Walrus is or how it is consumed, we embrace our commitment to be fact-based, independent, and to bring together interesting and interested people who care about the issues that matter. So here's a little game. Hands up if you read The Walrus. Yay. And hands up if you read The Walrus and somehow support it financially by subscribing or donating. You are my people. Thank you for coming. Tonight is a very special night for us because this is our 100th Walrus Talks. I know. We've done 100 of these things in the last 7 years across the country, so hands up if you've been to a Walrus Talks. Welcome back. Hands up if you're new. Let's welcome the new people. Okay. So we're thrilled to once again be working with our friends at Western University and the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. I am a Western alum. And are there any other Western alum, students, faculty here? Mustangs, where are we? Hello. Where's my purple thing? I forgot my purple thing. Thank you for all being here with us. So we at the Walrus have been working with Western alumni in arts and humanities. I'm honored to sit on the advisory council for SASA at Western. We've been working with them for several stellar years, and I want to thank them for making tonight possible. Please welcome the aforementioned Dean of Western's Faculty of Arts and Humanities, Michael Milday.
Thank you, Shelley. It's a great pleasure for us to partner with the Walrus, and especially on the 100th anniversary, as it were. So congratulations on that. And Dennis, thank you. It's a great pleasure to bring this event to the Grand Theatre for the first time. So together with our partners at Western Alumni and the Arts and Humanities Student Council, the Faculty of Arts and Humanities supports the Walrus Talks because we believe in the fundamental importance of engaging with the community in which we live. The students and faculty of the arts and humanities are not, never have been, alien creatures living in academic shadows on the outskirts of London. What we work on, things that we study and investigate, are the core elements of our common humanity: language, literature, art, and the world of ideas. These elements are everywhere, all the time, and sometimes we don't notice how much we rely on them just because we're so immersed in using them that they become, like the air we breathe, essential but invisible. So tonight, we hope to turn your attention to the way language, literature, art, and the world of ideas shape our lives by starting a conversation about remembrance. Remembering, memory, both are absolutely crucial to our ability to understand ourselves. But these are difficult, complicated concepts once you start really thinking about them. For one thing, remembering is an activity, and one that requires an awful lot of work. Sometimes we find ourselves thinking that memory is like a book or a video, and we just need to flip a few pages or scroll through a few screens to find what we need. Unfortunately, it is rarely that straightforward. The older I get, the harder it is to dredge up the name of that movie. You know, the one with the actor in it who won the Oscar for the other movie 2 years ago, or 3, maybe 7. These days we are lucky to have the internet on our phones and can check calendars and random facts about actors in films. In part, this suggests that we don't have to remember things, or that we can always remember things with a little help. But memories, remembering, turn out to be more than just events, dates, and places. They need to be connected to people. Remembering is really about putting together a story in which dates, places, and people play their role in creating a narrative and helping us make sense of our lives in our world. This kind of storytelling gets really interesting when we engage with other people, when we share our stories. Suddenly, we have to negotiate what we think we remember. Other people don't remember things the way we do. Perhaps they are more confident in their account. Perhaps they are mixed up. Perhaps we're mixed up. And so we discuss. And in the end, we come to some agreed version that stands until something or someone knocks it down and builds a new version. It's really the best we can do. So here's the thing. To remember something, whether it is what happened last Thanksgiving or what happened on November 11th, 1918, we need the support of our community and the dialogue and exchange that allows us to keep these parts of the world, these parts of our lives, fresh and meaningful. So I look forward to the words that we will hear tonight and to the stories that we will tell ourselves and others in the days ahead about what we heard here. Please enjoy the presentations.
Thank you, Michael. We are also excited about the topic tonight during this week leading up to Remembrance Day. Are there any veterans or families of people who served or still serve with us? Welcome to all of you as well. Our speakers tonight will give us much to think about remembrance from a wide variety of perspectives. It's a stellar lineup. So here's how it works at the Walrus Talks. Each talker has 7 minutes. They know this. And as Dennis said, I said so. They have 7 minutes, right? Each will come up and introduce themselves. You have a program. We're going to leave the lights up. The speakers are in speaker order on the front. Their bios are on the back, so this is your tool. Keep it with you. They will tell you their name and they will do their 7 minutes. You will hear the first 6 talkers in a row, and then in a unique twist on the Walrus Talks, very special tonight, our last 2 talkers will, John McLaughlin-Gray and Eric Peterson, will actually perform together, and then I will come back up. So just before they get underway, I'd like to thank each in advance. Thank you to Giller Prize-nominated author Lisa Moore. Thank you to Governor General Award-winning author Peter Behrens. Thank you to retired Corporal in the Royal Canadian Regiment, George Myatt. Thank you to Amazon Canada First Novel Award-winning author Michael Kahn. Thank you to former Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, Marie Wilson. Thank you to Juno Award-nominated singer-songwriter Isque. Thank you to writer, composer, performer John McLaughlin-Gray, with stage, television, and film actor and Governor General's Performing Arts Award laureate, Eric Peterson. Whew. Yes, so, and thank you all for coming. Let us begin.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lisa Moore, and I'm going to share some meditations on memory. A few days ago on a plane, I had a strange memory glitch, and perhaps you've experienced something similar. You glance up at the passengers as they head down the aisle to their seats, and you recognize a face in the crowd. Your heart speeds up. It's someone you know intimately, someone about whom you have felt great depths of emotion. But there's also something disorienting about the experience, something deeply unnerving. There's the shock of recognition, yes, and the feeling that there's been an entanglement rife with epiphany and revelation. But here's the peculiar part. You can't quite place the person. Memories of the interactions between you feel unmoored from time or a particular geography. You don't remember where you might have met or how you know each other. Yes, you've seen him up close. In fact, you've seen him naked. You know the way his facial muscles wince and settle while making love, what he looks like when consumed with fear. You know how his eyelids droop if he's telling a lie. You even know how his body responds when pierced by bullets from AK-47s. It comes to you, you have seen him die, maybe more than once. Yes, you have seen him die several times. He glances back at you, but his glance is entirely devoid of the slightest hint of recognition. And finally, you have placed him. You have seen him on television in a Netflix miniseries. Several miniseries. He's an actor. You do not know him at all. You blush. You have been duped by your own memory, tricked by smoke and mirrors. But was the memory recalled in this encounter entirely false, just because it was based on a story or fabrication, a made-up character, a dream, because it was backlit with stage lights, because the tears shed were drops of Visine? Or is the memory of him any less true or meaningful because it was founded on fiction? And those memories that are based on real people and events, in what ways are they untrustworthy? At the end of this summer, during a series of very hot days, I found myself cleaning my house in a fit of rage. How had things become so out of control? I kept all my diaries in a third-floor attic bedroom. My diaries, collected over 35 years, contained brief, fierce moments from every single day of my life, gestures and sensations, bits of overheard dialogue, losses and loves collected to use later in fiction. Sigmund Freud reminds us in his essay, The Mystic Notepad, that if we distrust our memory, we are able to supplement and guarantee its work by making a note in writing. But the trouble is the paper stacks up, and we still have to remember where we put the notes. He talks about a mystic writing pad, a child's toy that I remember from my own childhood, purchased at the dollar store. The pad has a sheet of wax covered by a piece of celluloid with a sheet in between. And when one presses on the plastic sheet with a stylo, the mark is retained on the middle sheet, but only until the two top sheets are lifted up, and then the writing is erased. However, the wax sheet at the bottom of the 3 sheets still contains the imprint of the mark. This mystic writing pad works like the unconscious, Freud suggests. The sheet of plastic like a prophylactic that allows the sensations to permeate but not be experienced until we're ready for them. Then they can float up to consciousness involuntarily when we need them. The South American writer George Luis Borges has a story called The Library of Babel, about a library which contains every possible book that might be written by combining all the letters of the alphabet in every iteration possible. And though most of the books would, of course, be meaningless nonsense, there would also be books that contain every possible future and past, an infinity of knowledges. He describes in great detail the layout of the labyrinth of the library, of rooms off rooms and the ladders the librarians must climb, and how the shelves are not organized in any particular manner. There's no way to find the meaningful books. The library's a mess. My diaries had become like Borges' library, a labyrinth of memory built without a map, or like Freud's mystic writing pad, with the experiences buried deep. One day last August, while cleaning the house, I decided to throw the diaries out. I flung the notebooks in my car, hundreds of notebooks, filling the back seat and the passenger seat and the hatchback. When I reached the dump, on what must have been the hottest day of the summer, there was a survey of dump visitors in progress. A questionnaire, a written record of what you were throwing out and why. The survey created a traffic jam, hundreds of cars in front of me and behind me, the towers of my memories collapsing on my lap, toppling over my shoulders when I touched the brake. I was being buried in them. I reached for a notebook somewhere in the middle and caused an avalanche. I opened to an arbitrary page. My 5-year-old daughter's slip-on canvas sneakers, printed with red roses, and a wave spilling up over the beach rocks, the foam encircling her ankles, the water thick with capelin, the stink of dying fish, and the freckled boy beside her who reaches into the wave and hauls out a wriggling flash of silver, holds it by the tail, tilts his head back, opens his lips in the biggest O he can make, pretending he's going to lower the fish into his mouth and swallow it alive. I took up diary after diary, reading a page from 1996, and another from 2003, and one from 1987, and one from 2017. There I was on my wedding night in the Newfoundland hotel, my husband breaking a giant mirror by bumping into it, all the shards of his reflection tumbling onto the floor. A first date, the princess bride, the death of my father, Trump elected, how warm the marble of the Taj Mahal was under my bare feet, how straight and oversized and noble the nose of the female tango dancer in a Buenos Aires courtyard, her stilettos snapping on the stones. Finally, the traffic jam had broken up, and I was the next car through to the dumpsters. I lifted the sheet on the mystic writing pad of my life and tossed 35 years of notes away, pages fluttering like the wings of a bird in the wind. The actor shut the lid on the overhead bin. He sits beside me and begins to write a text on his phone, but he falls asleep, lost in the labyrinth dream world of his own. When we land, he wakes and looks at the text he was composing on his phone, and with his thumb, he touches the delete arrow, each tiny letter disappearing until the whole line zips away and all of the text on his phone has been erased. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Peter Behrens. I've spent a lifetime adjusting microphones. Trying to get this one up. Yeah. Is that good? I am old, so I have forgotten a lot. But sometimes things happen to you that you remember. And sometimes things happen that you remember everything. This is one of those remember everything stories. It was Banff in 1980, very cold, clear, sharp, blue day after a week-long blizzard that had snowed and snowed and snowed and left us feeling cabin feverish. We needed to get out. We needed to ski. Though it was probably too cold to ski. I've been worrying about Celsius and Fahrenheit today. I live in the United States and thinking it's about 25 below Celsius. It's cold. But we had been trapped by this blizzard, and we needed to get out there. So we did. We loaded our skis onto her little car, and we drove out of Banff town to Lake Minnewanka, which is not that far away. Big lake surrounded by big, icy lumps of ice mountains that day, with that blue sky. And we got on our skis and we started skiing through the woods, these kind of little rolly aspen hills around the lake. And it was snowing for a week, as I say, and the snow was very deep. It was that cold, crystal, kind of light Rocky Mountain snow, but it was very deep. And there was no track or trail for us to follow, so we were just blasting our way through the snow. And we realized after we'd been out there for about 40 minutes, and we were both pretty tough people, that it was too cold to ski. It was getting to our lungs, and we could feel, it inside, and getting hoarse, and it was probably not healthy. So we decided we should go back. And we started skiing back to the car, and we realized that we could make it back there more quickly if we crossed a bit of the lake instead, because the wind had blown down the snow on the lake and packed it firmer, so it looked much easier to travel on than through those deep, snowy woods where we were breaking trail. So we started out across the bay in the lake, and we were halfway across that bay, 60 yards from either shore, when I heard her scream. And at the same moment, I looked down and saw the snow around my skis was turning gray. I looked around, and I saw my friend Hillary falling backwards into the lake, into a slurry of icy, mushy snow and water in the middle of the lake, in the middle of the Rockies, surrounded by these mountains that are just like big diamonds glittering there. And I got one ski off rather quickly, and I lay down on the ice, and I tried to reach her with it, but as I was doing that, the ice just gave way below me, and there we both were in this hole in the Rockies. And that was the sort of thing you realized you weren't going to get out of right away. You thought, what you literally thought was, so this is how I die. I had always wondered how it was going to end, and now I know. How strange. But we kept resisting and fighting it. It was very cold, and we couldn't get out of the hole because the ice kept breaking all around us. There was no one for miles around. It wasn't the sort of day anyone would go out on. And we kept going, though. We kept determinedly trying to push our way out, though the cold was seeping into us both. And I could feel my thoughts starting to slow, and the coordination between what my brain wanted my body to do and what my body was actually doing was starting to lag a little bit. But we both were determined people, And we both kept trying really hard, and I could see her face was white, like white. And her hair and her hat, everything was covered with ice. I probably looked the same way. I could hear her breathing. It sounded like a truck with something gone really wrong in it. It was hoarse, and I suppose mine was the same. So we were in there, and we weren't getting out, and it was really cold. And I could feel myself my thinking starting to gel, starting to slow down and congeal. And I know with what was my last coordinated mind-body interchange, I managed to push myself up on some ice, and the ice held, and I flopped over onto it from my belly up, and I kicked. And I got the rest of my body up on the ice. And kind of stuck to it. My clothes were all frozen right away. Turned around, and she managed to get herself over to that part of the ice and was kicking tremendously. I neglected to tell you this, but she went in the water with both her skis on, and she couldn't get them off, so she had, in the water, kicked off her boots and skis. So she got over there to where I'd gotten out, and she was a very strong woman and was kicking and determined. I think I grabbed her by the braid of her hair, and she got herself out. And we just flopped onto the ice like frozen fish in a supermarket. There we were. But we were a long way from anywhere, and we were completely soaked. And then completely hardened, we were turning into icemen. And we were sticking to the ice we were relying on. We started crawling for shore because we were afraid of the ice breaking through. But I realized halfway that if we were not moving more quickly, we were going to die. So we got up and we started running, and we made it to shore, and where we both experienced an enormous surge of adrenaline. It was really, I've never done a lot of drugs, but I've sure felt that adrenaline, and it was something else. And I know Hillary felt it as well. And we realized we had to get back to the car through these hilly, aspeny woods, kind of a Russian taiga landscape. And we didn't really know where the car was. We just started going through the woods. There was no trail. The snow was waist deep on me, deeper on her. I went ahead to try and blast through this trail. I was taller. And she followed, but she had nothing on her feet. Socks that were frozen. And her feet were in tremendous pain. And it was very hard for her to walk. She was a person of tremendous strength who never gave up anything, but she had a lot of difficulty moving. And pain was really vivid for her. And so she was screaming quite a bit just to let out the pain. And I was yelling at her to kind of keep going, which she didn't need me yelling at her. She was going anyway, but we kind of kept together that way. And we got to our car, finally. We went back some days later. I went back some days later, and we'd actually dead reckoned from the point we got out of the lake to the car, straight line through about a mile of woods and hills. We just totally right on it. Got to the car, and then we went through this ridiculous dance of two frozen people locked in their clothes with ice, trying to get the key to a 20-year-old Renault out of somebody's ski jacket, which was impossible to do until we broke the ice on my sweater so my hands, which were sort of not usable, came out. Got her jacket off, hooked it on the Saskatchewan license plate of her car, ripped the jacket open from the inside. The key fell onto the snow. We both scrabbled trying to pick up this key on the snow. We got it, and we were fitting it into the door of this battered little red car. When a car came around the road, the only other car we'd seen all day, and it was an old Volvo with skis on the roof rack, and the people in it belonged to the Alpine Club of Canada, which I'm tremendously grateful for because they saw us and they knew who we were and what had happened to us. And they stopped, and they immediately began giving us help. As soon as I was in a position where I felt no longer responsible and could hand over responsibility to someone else, I became very goofy and hypothermic and started saying silly things like, "We're fine. Take us home. We're okay." It's a classic sign of hypothermia is really poor decision making, and I was exhibiting it in all kinds of ways from that moment on. But they didn't pay me any heed. The woman in the front seat took off her clothes and cut off my frozen clothes with a knife, and Hillary was in the back seat trying to get her feet taken care of, but no one was paying much attention to her feet. She was in a lot of pain. I was sitting in the front seat of this Volvo with a naked woman in my arms as we were traveling down Banff Avenue at about 70 miles an hour, heading for looked like a wild party, but it wasn't. To the Mineral Springs Hospital, where they did a kind of triage on us, and men, particularly tall, thin men, lose their body core temperatures more rapidly than most women do. And I was exhibiting signs of pretty serious hypothermia by then, and just in a silly way I was talking, probably more than anything else. And they left Hillary, I remember, on the linoleum floor just inside the hospital. I remember the pools of water there. And I was on a steel table with a tube down my throat and people lying on top of me, and then hot towels on top of me. And then both of us were lowered separately into this thing. It was like you felt like a chicken going into a vat. It was like a bubbling hot water thing with an electric chair that slowly lowered you down very torturously. But it was better than being in a lake. So we survived. I'd like to see that little painting now. That's a painting that was done by the young woman, Hillary Johnston, who I was with in this adventure. A few weeks, I believe, after that event. That's her in the hole, and that's me reaching for her. That evening, they let us out of the hospital. We could have stayed if we'd wanted to, but we wanted to get out of there. And we went back to we were both artists at the Banff Center at that time. We went back to our room, and we fell asleep. But in the middle of that night, she woke up in distress. Her skin was on fire, she said. And she was extremely restless and extremely uncomfortable and extremely unhappy. So we went into the bathroom as all we could think of to do. We turned on all the lights in this white bathroom. And we turned on all the shower and the hot water, and the steam came out of us. And we just closed the door. We just sat there for an hour in that bright white light with that steam. I don't think we said anything at all. But that is how we managed to get through the experience. And the end of the story is, we've known each other now for 37, 38 years since we went into that hole. We've seen each other, I believe, twice in that time. We've stayed in touch every year around the time of our incident. We somehow get in touch with each other. We never mention it. We never have mentioned it in all those decades. Tangentially, we might refer to something or make a joke about ice, but we never spoke of the experience until last year, when I believe I started asking Hillary some things about it. And I'm a writer, and I know how stories evolve and change and get messed up over time. We spoke of that tonight. That's what writers do, and that's what people do, and that's how humans work with stories generally. And I had assumed that our story would have done that as well. And the thing that it didn't do, the thing that it stayed like a block of ice, and like those chunks of ice that were that day in those icy mountains that were sort of permanent, our story didn't change at all. The story she remembered is exactly down to its details, and ripping the jacket open on the Saskatchewan license plate. She remembered exactly the same things I did. So some stories aren't really stories, they're just like etchings. And they're not literary narratives, they're just, I guess, things that just stay there. Anyway, that's mine. Thank you for listening.
How you doing, everybody? Thank you very much to Western University. I got to lower this a little bit. And of course, all of you for coming here today. Particularly, it is very important for me to get the message out about Remembrance Day on the special 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. So when Blair reached out to me and says, George, people want to hear a story, of course, I thought right away, Army lecture, intro, main body, closure. I am a Canadian veteran. I stand here before you, and I'm very proud of that. My name is George Myatt. My medals represent service in Germany during the Cold War, the Gulf War, and the Bosnian War. So I've been to 3 wars with the Royal Canadian Regiment stationed here in London, Ontario. Our mission in the Royal Canadian Regiment, and I know a lot of people don't like it, but is to close with and destroy the enemy. That's our job. The Canadian soldier means perfecting winter warfare in the regiment, so we spent many years in the mountains of Norway with Ace Mobile Force. My destiny was to be a Canadian soldier. I grew up poor in Toronto. I had a lot of brothers and sisters, and food was scarce, so you didn't think of yourself first. My mother died when I was 6 years old, and I filled that gap with reading stories about Canadians in the war. Reader's Digest, because I only like the facts. I was amazed by the heroics. Canadians at Vimy Ridge, Passchendaele, the Battle of Cambrai, Arras, Saint-Julien. Pilots like Billy Bishop, Roy Barker, General Currie, and McNaughton. Sam Hughes, extraordinary people. By 15, I was working in a factory in Toronto, and I got to tell you, when I joined the military, it didn't do me very good. If you want to be a colonel, you got to graduate from Western. I spent most of my life as a corporal soldier in the RCR, and I was proud of that. I believed I was the next generation that Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae mentioned in his poem. Take up the quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw, the torch be yours that hold it high. So over the next 14 years, I specialized in courses that would make me valuable on the battlefield. I was and still capable of deploying, operating many weapon systems in many different environments, proficient in machine gun, anti-tank, explosive communications, winter warfare, reconnaissance, you name it. I believe, like all of us, taxpayers deserve the best for their money, so I worked hard. Let's also keep in mind that we had a huge reputation to fulfill. Canadians have proved themselves in World War I, World War II, Korea. When I joined the forces, most of those veterans were Korean War veterans. They were tough on us. Moving into the main body, at 17 years old, I joined the forces. By 18, I was in the Army and pretty happy. I mean, after all, I came from a poor background. And here, they gave you food. You got dessert. I never seen dessert before. And 2 flavors. So I was very happy. I grew up in the back of an armored personnel carrier we called the Grizzly. Today they call it LAV, Light Armored Vehicle, and it's made right here in London, Ontario by General Dynamics Land Systems. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud that London has created and supplied the technology to the fighting soldier. I'm proud of my regiment, Canada's oldest infantry regiment, home, Wolseley Barracks, London, Ontario. I was influenced by one of the greatest generations we will ever know, the men and women that served in the First World War. Over 200,000 Canadians killed or wounded. I dedicated my retirement to ensuring they are not forgotten. My life was dedicating to be the best Canadian soldier possible. After all, we had a huge reputation to uphold. While posted in Germany, I made a point of visiting all Canadian war cemeteries. In fact, my wife Lydia and my son Andrew were just in France for the 100th anniversary of Vimy Ridge. By 1992, I was a changed man. The Gulf War was over. We had rolled into Sarajevo under fire, devastated by war. The people were starving and things looked helpless. That changed drastically when out of nowhere, the president of France landed at the airport. General Mackenzie had no other choice but to send the Royal Canadian Regiment, your regiment, almost 500 soldiers and armored vehicles to secure the area immediately. For that, they won the Governor General's Award. When I got back to Germany, the wall came down and the end of the Cold War was reality. Posted back to Canada, I ended up in Petawawa, which was not nearly as appealing as Germany or the Forest City, I can tell you. Like many, I divorced and my children came to London. After years of begging, I finally got Area Support Unit London, Wolseley Barracks. I asked the kids, what are you guys doing for Remembrance Day? And they said, well, Dad, they put on John Lennon's song about all the people. I said, oh, okay. So I contacted the Thames Valley School Board and made it my responsibility to help educate Canadians about our history. Over the past 15 years, I've spoken to over 10,000 children about the importance of Remembrance Day and recognizing the sacrifice of 200,000 Canadians, 66 of them that were killed in action in the First World War. As the ambassador of the Memory Project, London, I presented all types of events. I volunteer and educate the public about the Royal Canadian Regiment's history here at the RCR Museum on Wolseley Street, on Oxford Street at Wolseley Barracks. And I'm also the membership chair for the Royal Canadian Regiment Association London branch. Over the past 10 years, I've volunteered as a veterans advocate and provide various forms of administrative guidance to veterans to help them through the veterans process with Veterans Affairs. In closing, learn more about Canadian history, attend a Remembrance Day service, and never forget their sacrifice. Here's just 10 quick fast facts, compliments of Veterans Affairs in the London Public Library about the First World War. Oh, let me get to that right now. Sorry, we're moving right along. And I should have been wearing my glasses. Starting off, number 1, Canadians saw their first major action in Ypres, and that is in Belgium on April 22nd, 1915. Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae was inspired to write in Flanders Fields to honor his friend that died during the battle. The Battle of the Somme began in the early morning of July 1st, 1916. The 1st Newfoundland Regiment suffered especially heavy losses on that day. Of approximately 800 Newfoundlanders that went into that battle, only 68 were present the next day for roll call. The Battle of Vimy Ridge, that's on the back of our $20 bill, began on the morning of April 9, 1917, and ended 4 days later. It was the first time all 4 Canadian divisions fought as a Canadian Corps. The Canadian victory at Vimy Ridge is considered to be a key point in the shaping of Canada's history. Canadians took part in the Battle of Passchendaele from October to November 1917. In a muddy corner of Belgium, Canadians overcame unimaginable hardships to capture this strategic village. More than 2,800 Canadian nurses' sisters served with the Canadian Army Medical Corps. Approximately 4,000 Aboriginal Canadians enlisted during the war. This represented nearly 1/3 of all Aboriginal Canadian men eligible to serve. Approximately 70 Canadians were awarded the Victoria Cross for most conspicuous bravery in the presence of the enemy during the First World War. More than 650,000 men and women from Canada and Newfoundland served during the First World War. More than 66,000 gave their lives and 172,000 were wounded. The fighting ended on November the 11th, 1918, 100 years ago, with the signing of the armistice. The war officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Lest we forget. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, I can't top that. So, good evening. I'm Michael Kahn, and I'm here this evening partly for being the author of one book, The Water Beetles, which the Walrus awarded a prize to back in May. But in a longer-term sense, I'm here because I wasn't vaporized in 1981, or in 1983, or again in 1984, against all my expectations. I acquired these expectations because of a stream of warnings I was constantly picking up as a boy in the 1980s. The most memorable of these was in church one afternoon when the minister noted that the city of Winnipeg, normally and deservedly the butt of jokes, was also a high-value Soviet nuclear target, thanks to its 2 military bases and adjacent nuclear facility. The Reverend announced this reassuringly, since the city was scheduled to receive the equivalent of 200 Hiroshimas within a space of minutes, and we would all go quickly. 200 Hiroshimas when the day came. When the day came, because it was assumed then, it soon would. Most people, of course, have forgotten how dangerous a time the 1980s were. Who would want to dwell on such a terror? We mostly remember it for Back to the Future and the setting of Stranger Things, and that has been our choice. We have also forgotten or don't even know how long we have lived at the brink of apocalypse. There have been many. Now, it largely takes the form of fears about global warming, especially after the last IPCC report, but there are other fears as well. Most of you will know the story of Stanislav Petrov, a Soviet officer who in 1983 disobeyed an order to report a radar image that appeared to be incoming American missiles, but was actually a cloud cluster, thus preventing a full-scale retaliatory nuclear attack by the USSR. Only because of him are we here today. In a different time, a young man wrote in his diary one evening how a few nights earlier he watched in horror as his childhood friend went mad with fear and began to howl like an animal and then bled himself to death in expectation of the coming terror and the end of all he knew. That was a young provincial Lithuanian man in 1804, as he and his fellow villagers awaited the arrival of Napoleon and the destruction and atrocities his armies were known to bring. And centuries further back in Europe, during the great episodes of plague, there were many who resigned themselves to debauchery, magic, and visions, believing they were witnessing the end of all things. If we care to look back into history, as we rarely do, we should think of them with deep empathy. We have always lived at the edge of our destruction, even before we lacked the full technology, whether direct or incidental, to destroy the entire human race. Death is the end of a single life. But apocalypse is the destruction of what we believed would survive us. our culture, our words, and our descendants. We can name a few of its current potential forms, but the historical list is long, continuous, and plausible. Wars, pandemics, natural disasters, the sudden infertility of land and creatures. Contemplating these outcomes isn't something we do well. A very small number of people know enough to grasp some of the risks we face, and the rest of us are left to bicker, play partisan, or, most rationally, ignore the risk. But there's an important question, a moral one, about how we should form our attitudes, because how we face risk matters a lot. After the last IPCC report, a lot of people concerned about global warming were publicly asking what options were really left. Blind optimism isn't helpful, but on the other hand, should I despair isn't a rational question, and we shouldn't try to answer it. Yet many people have been asking that. Now, we are mired in irrational answers and narratives today, and we can all see the effect they're having. Should we strive to make that worse? We are, after all, naturally biased to believe that negative talk is more serious and informed. We also ignore all the past ways we've survived, and not all of it is due to luck. I think it will get much worse, but the technological innovation engineered by a very small number of people will eventually pull us back. But my own guesswork isn't the issue here. But even if I'm right and we're saved again, I feel certain that within a generation, the great terror of global warming will have been forgotten. And should that happen, as I hope it does, what will people in the early 22nd century remember of these times? Twitter and cat videos? Slow computers? Too many highway deaths? If our descendants forget our current moment at the brink, they will not be unique. They will be, as we have always been, inclined to forget. What do we remember now about the human experience of World War II? Brisk newsreel clips and Glenn Miller and V-Day parades, or the epidemic suicides of whole German families in fear of Allied reprisals, cannibalism in Japanese prison camps? What do we remember or even know of the An Lushan rebellion in the 8th century, when over a tenth of the world's population was massacred in a vision of apocalypse? How often do we think on the era before Norman Borlaug, when millions regularly faced starvation from crop failures? And how many remember the words of Yudhishthira, the hero of the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata? He and his 4 brothers were all led to a lake one day, while exiled in the forest. And though they were dying of thirst, the god Dharma, concealed in the water, forbid them from drinking until they could answer his one question. He asked each of the brothers in turn, "What is the greatest mystery?" One by one, the brothers were struck dead as they gave the wrong answer, and their bodies lay at the water's edge. It was only the last one, Yudhishthira, the eldest and wisest, who answered correctly and whose life was spared. When Dharma asked him, "What is the greatest mystery?" Yudhishthira looked into the water, and he replied, "Each day men die, but we live as though we were immortal. This is the greatest mystery." Thank you.
My name is Marie Wilson. I'm visiting today from Yellowknife, though I spent much of my youth in this part of the country. There's a beautiful little cemetery, a country cemetery in southwestern Ontario, not far from here. I spent part of my weekend there, remembering. My father had a great sense of humor. Everyone he knew seemed to have a funny story about something he'd said or done. And if time allowed, I'd tell you my favorite, the one about the tombstone. As I visited my parents' grave the other day, I found myself smiling at the memory of that story. And I found myself tearing up as I pulled grass from the memorial plaque beside the stone. It says, "He served his country." I also see another grave site in my mind's eye. Just imagine the lonely isolation, rural Saskatchewan, weathered white faces, fences with fading teddy bears. It's the burial ground of Regina Industrial School, one of Canada's oldest Indian residential schools. Feelings overwhelm me. What if the children lying here were my ancestors? What if the children and grandchildren in my life were taken away by government agents, police, or religious leaders with promises of good education only to end their shortened lives in such an abandoned field, plots overrun, graves unmarked? Most haunting is the familiarity. This is not the first such school graveyard I have visited or heard about. Early this century, residential school survivors from the past 100 years took Canada and the churches that ran the schools to court. A massive legal settlement included a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so I became a commissioner of the first TRC in the Western world and the first to focus on harms done to our nation's own children. Almost 7,000 survivors recounted the harms of their school days to us. Family rupture, fear, humiliation, abuses of all kinds. The most definitive harm was death itself, as many spoke for the voiceless, those they had seen die and those they had known to have died or disappeared as schoolmates, friends, siblings. 3,200 Indigenous children died at residential schools. 1,000 others were sent home or to Indian hospitals to die there, and likely double that number at least, all told. For countless others were only partially recorded. A first-name child here, a no-name child there, sometimes a home community reference for another, and only maybe a gender. Some were sick, some died in fires in condemned school buildings, some drowned or froze to death trying to run away. The cause of death for many, not even recorded. The negligent record-keeping and disproportionate deaths, like the schools themselves, were built on a foundation of attitudes. A belief that Indigenous people were inferior, that their cultures could, should, and would be extinguished. And the fastest and cheapest way to do that was to put their children in residential schools far from their parents and cultural teachings. Many children now lie in school cemeteries long since abandoned, some in mass graves, some buried before their parents were ever told of their passing, cause of death, or gravesite location. Our TRC created the National Residential School Death Register, the only national effort ever made to record the names of all students who died and to locate their graves, often unmarked. But we are nowhere close to finding them all. Reconciliation on this front needs resources and much more research and analysis to identify and locate the rest of the missing. Yet as my heart and mind return to this Saskatchewan field, I remain hopeful. Local communities there, churches and governments working together to identify the buried, reconnect family ties, protect and consecrate the grounds where the children lie. Historic strangers now working together in the name of social justice and reconciliation for the sake of those children. Come with me now to another place, farther west, central Alberta. A few years back, a farmer came across what appeared to be 4 burial sites at the edge of a field. He didn't just plow or plant them over. He notified someone, and things began to shift. The church that ran a nearby residential school and the nearby Indigenous spiritual leaders collaborated in a traditional 4-year-long sending home ceremony for these 4 newly found and more than 100 other former students from the Red Deer School. Does anything compare with the emotional impact of learning the names of the deceased in the case of multiple deaths? It humanizes the massive loss of life, transforms victims from statistics to somebody's relatives, helps us relate to the enormity of the tragedy. We have a long history of noting the names of the fallen on public monuments to victims of war. Even more powerful is the experience of hearing those names read aloud. I can still hear the names from that Alberta day. Children's names. They didn't go to war, they went to school. Family descendants and willing strangers have come together to resurrect the value of these forgotten little lives. Eyes are moist, voices quiver with more attentive care this day than our country seemed capable of offering these children during their lifetimes. And in the midst of such reverence, I find myself thinking about Remembrance Day. My grandfather was a soldier in both World Wars. My oldest uncles fought in World War II, and my father served the final year of that war in Canada, starting right off here in Wolseley Barracks. All of that influenced our family culture. I spent many bittersweet childhood days gathered around public cenotaphs. I've raised my children and grandchildren to do the same, learning about those wars and others since, learning to honor the fallen, learning to remember, lest we forget. For me, the comparisons are obvious. Our Truth and Reconciliation Commission motto was, "For the child taken, for the parent left behind." As a country, we understand the heartache of a mother who has lost son or daughter to war. We make great efforts to bring home with dignity and ceremony anyone lost, and to honor the parent left behind. Each year, we name a Silver Cross mother to represent all grieving parents. We mark Remembrance Day in national ceremony in all our schools and at monuments throughout the country to honor all veterans, living or dead. And we acknowledge collectively those never found with the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Yet we have never demonstrated such reverence for residential school children who also we lost in a state-sanctioned context of proven harms. We have failed to keep any official track of them, much less bring them home in ceremony. We have shown unceremonious disregard for any parent left behind. How many days have we ever gathered together nationally to remember thousands of children who died on Canada's own soil? As for the missing in circumstances still unknown, where is our national monument to the unknown child? We are a country still learning to remember. Indeed, we are a country with much still to learn about many things, but especially about each other. The 94 calls to action of our Truth and Reconciliation Commission are all about that, some of them specifically about the missing children. We all have work to do, governments, all sectors of society, people like you and me. We need to act as non-partisan priority on the urgency of those TRC calls to action. This is just beginning to take hold in Canada as we deepen our understanding of our own history. And so, in this season of remembrance, I remain standing and speaking from a country-wide field of heartache and possibility. The possibility that together we will work to uphold the lives of 7 generations of Indigenous peoples we have harmed, and to remember the beloved little ones we allowed to get lost along the way, lest we forget.
Kusene Marie. Tanse, wasas kwaneskonisniga son, kamamako kitsiwao. My name is Blue Sky Woman, but you guys can call me Iskwe. I come from the Cree, I come from the Métis, and I come from Treaty 1 territory. But before all of this, I come from the stars. In Cree culture, we are taught that we are the descendants of the star people, the ones who shared with us our knowledge and our understanding, shared with us teachings, maps of the sky. They're the ones that gave us fire. We are taught that we return to the sky when we're finished walking here on Earth. And when you look up to see a falling star, you're seeing the comings and goings of the star people, our ancestors. So tonight, as we've come together here on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and Ojibwe, and the Wendat, I invite you to share with me some of the stories of my ancestors. I'd love to first introduce you to Nimushum, my grandfather. In Cree, we say Tanse. So you guys want to say Tanse Tom? Tanse Tom. That's me. I did a very large part of my growing up with my gramps in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He was most definitely my best friend and one of the people that I loved most in this world. But we grew up in two very different Winnipegs. See, he grew up brown in a city that didn't take and doesn't really take kindly to brown people all that much, especially if said brown people are Indigenous. And I grew up in the same city, but I grew up with fair skin and freckles and blue eyes. And this allowed me to walk in two worlds, because this allowed me to walk in the world of my Indigenous ancestry and my family, my culture, my language, but it also allowed me to walk outside of that into the other worlds. So while Nimushum was kicked out of establishments, followed, beat up, all because he was just another Indian, my skin offered me what he liked to call my get-out-of-jail-free card. I always remember him telling me about this one establishment in Winnipeg in particular that when he was growing up, him and his brothers were never allowed into. They would get kicked out the moment that they would try to come in, all because they dared enter while being brown. And however, some 30-ish years later, he had a granddaughter who walked in two worlds and had no problem entering this very establishment. So what did my grandpa do? Well, he bought me an annual membership. 4 years in a row. And I remember this one day in particular where he came with me to have coffee at the cafe that was inside this building. And I remember watching him as he was walking down the hallway uncomfortably, looking up at this wall. It was their community wall of fame. And as he walked along, he came to pause in front of a group of photographed faces and looked up at them, these people of community pride. He would point, started pointing, and he said, "This guy right here used to beat me and my brothers up, him and his buds." He started to tell me these stories. And I could see on his face that this story didn't fall into the same category of neighborhood scraps that he had been in enough times. He grew up in downtown Winnipeg. It's a tough, tough place. But this one left scar tissue. He then continued to tell me several other similar stories about other folks on this very wall. And I just stood there and listened. I held his hand in my mind because even though his heart was full of love, affection wasn't his strongest attribute. But he felt me, and we always held each other up. See, while my gramps walked this world with brown skin and judgments following him at so many corners, I found myself in a bit of an opposite sphere, where people assumed I was anything and everything but Indigenous. And I can't tell you how many times this has led me to find myself in situations where people assume that I'm going to understand or relate to what they're saying. I remember in high school, folks would enter these heated conversations at parties that we might be having about how tired they were of how the government kept giving all the Indians handouts, how the drunks downtown need to get up and get jobs, those fucking savages. How the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And this was when I was in high school. Eventually, though, those people stopped saying these things to me because I wouldn't stop saying things in front of them. Things like, "Hi, I am those people that you're talking about. I am the legacy of my ancestors. I am a good Indian, and I am alive." See, what I had learned after all those years watching my grandpa struggle internally with his identity towards the outside world, while listening to his hushed stories of pride and cultural teachings, stories that I'd later learned skipped the generation of my mom and my aunties, and were taught to me in somewhat of a trepidatious way. I learned the strength of remembering each and every story my grandpa told me, remembering the way his face lit up when he stood to honor the Indigenous graduates at the Children of the Earth powwow, remembering how proud I was to hold his legacy in my heart. Because even though we grew up in two very different Winnipegs, and even though our experiences might seem polarized to the naked eye, his being brown and Indigenous at first glance, and mine, well, being anything but, even though there were moments where his fear for my safety became all he could think of when he watched me speak up for our people, even through all of this, we remembered. We remembered our truths. We remembered our legacies. We remembered our teachings and stories that came from the sky. We remembered that even though we were different, we were also the same, because we're all people first, regardless of color, culture, language, or class. We are all people first. And to me, that's what we should never forget. Ikosane.
I'm Eric Peterson. And you're?
I'm John Gray. That's me.
I remembered. Oh, Bishop, I have an absolutely ripping idea. I want you to try and picture this. Two pilots, compatriots in glory, cross the line in the dim early dawn. It's dark, a slight fog. They fly straight to the German aerodrome at Douai, ghosts in the night. The Hun, unsuspecting, sleeps cozily in his lair. The sentries are sleeping. Perhaps the Baron von Richthofen himself is there, sleeping, dreaming of eagles and Wiener Schnitzel. It's the moment of silence, just before dawn. Suddenly, he is awakened by the sound of machine gun fire. He rushes to the window to see 4, maybe 5 of his best machines in flames. He watches as the frantic pilots try to take off, and one by one are shot down. The 2 unknown raiders strike a devastating blow. Bishop, you and I are those 2 unknown raiders. Jesus, I like it. It's a good plan. How do we get out? Get out? Yeah, get out. You know, escape. I don't think you quite get the picture, Bishop. It's an heroic exploit. Getting out has nothing to do with it. Oh. Well, it's a good plan. It's got a few holes I'd like to see plugged. I'd like to think about it. All right, Bishop, you think about it, but remember this: compatriots in glory. Quite a fella.
the dying of Albert Ball.
He was only 18 when he downed his first machine, and any chance of living through this war was small. He was 19 when I met him, and I never will forget him, the pilot by the name of Albert Ball. No matter what the odds, he left his fate up to the gods, laughing as the bullets brushed his skin. Like a medieval knight, he would charge into the fight and trust that one more time his pluck would let him win. And he courted the Reaper like the woman of his dreams, and the Reaper smiled each time he came to call. But the British, like their heroes, cold and dead, or so it seems, and their hero in the sky was Albert Ball. But long after the fight, way into the night, cold thoughts as dark as night would fill his brain. For bloodstains never fade, and there are debts to be repaid for the souls of all those men who died in vain. So when the night was dark and deep, and the men were fast asleep, an eerie sound would filter through the night. It was a violin, a sound as soft as skin. Someone was playing in the dim moonlight. There he stood, dark and thin, and on his violin played a song that spoke of loneliness and pain. It mourned his victories. It mourned dead enemies and friends whom he would never see again. Yes, he courted the Reaper like the woman of his dreams, and the Reaper smiled each time he came to call. But the British, like their heroes, cold and dead, or so it seems, and their hero in the sky was Albert Ball. It's an ironic twist of fate that brings a hero to the gate, and Ball was no exception to the rule. Fate throws out the spark in a way as if to mark the fine line between a hero and a fool. Every time he'd cross the line, Albert Ball would check the time by an old church clock, reminding him of home. The Huns came to know the man who flew so low on his way back to the aerodrome. It was the 6th of May. He'd done bloody well that day. For the 44th time, he'd won the game. As he flew low to check the hour, a hail of bullets from the tower, and Albert Ball lay dying in the flames. But through his clouded eyes, maybe he realized this was the moment that he'd been waiting for. From the moment that he died, he was a hero, bona fide. There ought to be no living heroes in this war. For when a country goes insane, obsessed with blood and pain, just to be alive is something of a sin. A war's not satisfied until all the best have died, and the devil take the man who saves his skin. But sometimes late at night, when the moon is cold and bright, I sometimes think I hear that violin. Death is waiting just outside, and my eyes are open wide as I lie in wait for morning to begin. For I'm courting the Reaper, like the woman of my dreams, and the Reaper smiles each time I come to call. But the British, like their heroes, cold and dead, or so it seems, and my name will take the place of Albert Ball.
Population of Canada, the First World War was 8 million. Today it's 32. So if you're looking at the dead and the wounded, the casualties of 250, to measure their impact, you would have to look at it as about 1 million today. It's possible to say that what brought the country together around the war wasn't victory, but it was mourning. Look at the names on the statues anywhere you go. Someone was killed a long time ago. I remember the faces, I remember the time. Those were the names of friends of mine. The statues are old now and they're fading fast. Something big must have happened way in the past. The names are so faded you can hardly see. The faces are always young young to me.
Friends ain't supposed to die till they're old. And friends ain't supposed to die in pain. No one should die alone when he's 21. And living shouldn't make you feel ashamed. You can't believe how young we were back then. One thing's for sure, we'll never be that young again. We were daring young men with hearts of gold. And most of us never got old. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking, I'll go in the reverse order, that Billy Bishop Goes to War by John McLaughlin Gray and Eric Peterson. Eric joined us tonight on his one night off where he's performing at Theatre Aquarius in Hamilton. Drove from Hamilton to do this. John flew all the way from Vancouver to do this with us tonight. Yes. Join me in thanking all of our talkers. All the way from Newfoundland tonight, Lisa Moore. Our Canadian friend Peter Behrens, who actually now lives in Cambridge, Mass. I'm pretty sure George said he was from London. Corporal George Matt, thank you. Michael Kahn, who came from Winnipeg for tonight. Marie Wilson, as she mentioned, from Yellowknife, thank you. And Iskway, of course, is from the stars. Via Hamilton. We make memories every day, and so remembrance is not just about looking back, but we also need to look forward. So who better to talk about the future than one of Western's own bright lights? Please welcome to say a few words, the President of the Arts and Humanities Students' Council, Misha Appel. Welcome, future.
Hi, everyone. Wasn't that an amazing talk? So, as was mentioned, my name is Misha Appel, and it is a privilege to be here as the president of the Arts and Humanities Student Council at Western University. You'll see among you tonight over 100 graduate and undergraduate students who are here to take part in these important conversations. We are excited to celebrate this wonderful experience as part of the greater Western community, and specifically with the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. Please join me again in thanking Shelley and the team at Walrus and everyone who came here together to make this event a great success. So I invite you all to continue these important conversations started by our amazing panelists and their stories during the reception. I'm going to give the stage back to Shelley now. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you.
Thank you, Misha. I'm going to do an extraordinarily organized thing here and ask our talkers everyone who is on the stage to rise up and go out the back of the theater. And you can clap on their way out. They're going to meet you at the reception, but you're all going to have to stay with me for a minute. Okay, bye, guys. Thank you. We do that for two reasons. One is they sometimes need some water to go to the bathroom, and the other thing is so you don't trap them in the front row and try to talk to them before they get to the bar. So I'm going to keep you, as I said, for 2 minutes. As I mentioned, this is our 100th Walrus Talks. That means there are now 700 7-minute videos that you can watch, 700 Walrus Talkers for 7 minutes each that you can watch wherever, whenever you want on our YouTube channel called Walrus Television. So it's a great thing to do with your morning coffee. You can go just to the walrus.ca and scroll. There's 700 of them. You can also subscribe to the magazine. I told you I was going to bug you about this. There weren't many hands that went up on the subscribe or support financially, the charitable, not-for-profit, independent thing here. So you can subscribe at thewalrus.ca, but it's way more convenient to do so tonight at our table in the lobby, where Tina and the Walry, which we know is not a word, but we use it anyway, where the Walry in the lobby will help you. Just for you tonight, a full year's subscription to the Walrus is just $25, 10 issues a year. We practically deliver it ourselves to your door. It's true. You can also buy books at that table out there tonight by the assembled Walrus Talkers that you heard tonight. And you can also choose to support the Walrus with a donation, because guess what? Every dollar you donate tonight will be matched. We have a pair of donors named Gretchen and Donald Ross. Gretchen Ross is from London, Ontario. The Rosses are going to match every dollar you donate tonight, dollar for dollar. We think because it's our 100th that, I don't know, $100 sounds good. And they will make it $200, which would be awesome. The thing you need to know is that fake news is really cheap to make, but fact-based journalism about the issues that matter is expensive. So if you want fact-based journalism, we need your support. And what else do I have to tell you? Oh, our friends at Adventure Canada are on the 4th floor where the reception will be. You're all invited to the reception. You can enter to win a once-in-a-lifetime $30,000 trip to Newfoundland. So please stop by and visit our friends there. I would like to thank, what did I do wrong? $30,000 trip. Yes, it's on a ship. You go on a ship, it circumnavigates, it's 10 days, it's expensive. $30,000 you can enter for a chance to win. I also want to thank Dennis and everyone at the Grand. This is also their only night off. As you know, the Wars is playing here. Monday's their only dark day, so they all came out to enable us to do this tonight, which was fantastic. Thank you to our national partners at Inspire and Shaw for being everywhere we go. Please join us at the reception. As I said, there is food, there is drink, and if you are there, there will also be good conversation. Thank you for coming. Merci, Megwitch. After the reception, safe home. One last thing. We are not the Walrus. You are the Walrus. Good night.